Melissa McMahon, who's representing AUSIT New South Wales branch. We are very thankful to AUSIT for promoting this event and us having such a great interest from interpreters and translators. So thank you, Melissa, and your team for that. As many of you would be aware, AUSIT is the National Professional Association for Interpreters and Translators, and all Australian accredited translators and interpreters make a commitment to the AUSIT Code of Ethics and Conduct as part of their accreditation process. Through this and other resources, AUSIT works to maintain professional standards in the industry and also to promote awareness of the profession amongst the public and users of language services. We have a bit of a French connection in our speakers. So Melissa is a Sydney-based French to English translator. She's been practicing full-time as a translator for the last 8 years and regularly uses and admits to use computer-assisted translation tools. She's been a member of AUSIT since 2009 and is a former marketing officer for the New South Wales branch. I'd now like to invite Melissa to take centre stage.
So, I don't want to be the naysayer in this debate. I think it would be kind of immoral to kind of try and get in the way of people who are doing a very important job for the community and who are very budget limited, you know, to kind of go, no, you know, you can't look at tools to make your job, you know, easier and do more because there's so much that needs to be done. AUSIT doesn't have a position on machine translation. It's a tool for human translators, relationships and good practices with translators, between translators and organisations. So that's really the main task here. Okay, now I'm just going to briefly recap what Helen has said. When we're talking about machine translation, firstly, we have tools like Google Translate that break down a text into segments, send it off into the internet and come back with a match or not, depending on how much is out there. Translation memory software, which are the CAT tools we've been talking about, match your little bits of text with stuff that you have already translated. It's also a form of statistical matching because it can come up with a 100% match, something that's identical to something you've translated before, or something that's just a bit similar. But it all helps. On the ground, in terms of industry practices, and in terms of, you know, for example, the method that Anne used, these things always work together or always can work together. The Google Translator Toolkit, which is a bit more complicated than Google Translate, always integrates the translation memory. So once you've translated or fixed a translation, approved it, it goes into your memory for use in the future. On the other side, your translation memory software always, these days, has the option of plugging into Google Translate so that if it doesn't come up with something from your memory, it gives you the option of giving you a machine translation of your text. Now, this is just a little picture of what a CAT tool looks like to work with. It kind of probably looks a bit alien at the moment if you don't have any experience. Down the bottom there is kind of the text the way it would look in Word. Up the top you have on the one side your source text broken into segments, and on the other side where you enter your translation or where a machine translation will automatically come up. There are all sorts of functions built into this, all sorts of tools you can use. You can sort your segments according to shorter and longer, or more frequent and less frequent, and that's going to be really useful if you're trying to apply either your translation memory or machine translation. Now, this is a little overview of translation practices based on the pros.com polls. Pros.com is a translator portal, and every day they put up a little snap poll based on questions submitted by a translator can submit a question and submit the possible responses. They usually get about 1,500 responses. It's international and anonymous. It's not really scientific on the level of, you know, compared to university, but it gives you some idea. So from searching in that, these are some figures that I came up with. 65 just over 65% of translators use CAT tools on a regular basis, so that's your translation memory software. You can kind of assume that if translators use them, there must be some benefit in terms of time saving, effort saving, or quality improvement. 46% think they definitely increase output, 35% think they improve quality. Now, we turn to machine translation. 37% say they use machine translation tools. So that's things like Google Translate, which they may or may not be plugging into their translation memory software. And that's up from 15% in 2009. On the other hand, 67% say they do not accept assignments to post-edit machine translations. When you look into why, it's because you often get post-editing jobs advertised as proofing jobs or revision jobs, which basically is, at least, maybe half the rate. Most translators won't accept a proofing job without looking at the text first, because it's just as annoying and time-consuming to fix a bad human translation as a machine translation. But that's the main reason, where you have, it's going to take, in my opinion, a lot longer to post-edit a machine translation than to review a good human translation. The kind of savings that Helen was talking about, sort of a 20% improvement maybe when you're post-editing a machine translation, people, offer 50% of the translation rate or less, and that's just kind of a misunderstanding of how it works. What are the advantages of CAT tools? Again, Helen's kind of covered some of this. Machines are good at mechanical tasks, repetitive, menial aspects of your text. No translator feels oppressed when this stuff is done for them. I translate a lot of cookbooks, 50 grams of butter. There's not much margin for error there. Well, they're French cookbooks, so it's 250 grams of butter. They can take care of that stuff and allow the translator to focus on more complicated elements. They're not good at handling more complicated elements. So translation memories let you build a resource so that where once you would go, I've translated something like this before, or I know this word. If you're good at building up glossaries, then maybe that wasn't a problem, but that translation memory software automates that process. It will automatically, assuming you have fed all your stuff into it, and this will improve over time, but it will automatically come up with, if you've translated something the same or similar in the past, it will come up with that. It's much easier to search for terms and so on. And there are some consistency advantages. Just basically, if you have translated the same thing in a different way, it will flag that for you. That's not always a mistake. Even with single words, they can mean a different thing according to the context. So even if something is 100% the same, it's not necessarily something you don't need to look at. Disadvantages. And this especially applies to machine translation, because when you have a well-developed translation memory, and I think this is really where you need to be looking at and where the most possibilities are, because it will allow you to reuse your existing resources, assuming you can centralise the way Michael was talking about. Okay, fixing a machine translation can take as long or longer than translating from scratch and be less enjoyable. Even if it doesn't take longer, it can interfere with your flow, basically. When you're translating well, it's a bit like playing the piano. You see the text, you hear it in your mind, you are inside the text, you're inside your own formulation of the translation. A machine translation can be a bit of a third wheel in that process. And this is just based on my experience. This is not, research. Immediately when a machine translation comes up, you're distracted from the source text, you're looking to fix the target text. And I'm talking about, personally, I do sometimes plug in machine translation to my CAT tools. Over time, I feel that I am doing that less because I feel like it is interfering with the quality, actually, quite apart from the enjoyability of the process. because I find I'm getting distracted from the source text, it can introduce unnoticed errors. I might come across a word at a later stage in my drafting and go, where did that come from? I would never use that word. But maybe I was looking at a bigger problem in the text and I didn't pick it up. It can create false confidence. A word that you might have looked up, just definitely looked up. The machine translation gives you a translation and you kind of go, oh, that must be it. I mean, you don't, you check, but again, you might be distracted and fixing bigger problems. Fragmentation, this is a problem both with translation memories and machine translation because it breaks it down into segments. I find I can never really sign off on a translation until I, see it back in its original format and have tweaked. And sometimes it's hard to see that bigger picture when it's all broken down and made looks quite artificial. Okay, so it's kind of obvious, I think, that the different kind of texts are going to work better or worse, and I've kind of done a spectrum. Better, short sentences, simple, standardised, technical, if you're kind of using repeated terminology, formulaic, restricted, it's going to handle those things better. Worse, longer sentences, complex, and wherever you have creativity, ambiguity, novelty, judgment, sensitivity, whenever you need all these factors, that's where it's not going to work as well. Most texts are going to mix both of those things. Most texts have some bits that are basic and some bits that are complex, which is why it can be useful to have a software that can organise it in a different way. The other variable is language. Google Translate relies on there being a lot of material, a lot of bilingual material on the internet in your language. The less material there is, the less access to the internet your group has, the less good quality translation is, the worse it will work. Those are external things. There's also things that Helen raised. There are internal structure. There are languages which are structurally unsuited, or the incompatibility between the language, the source language and the target language. Japanese, for example, which is a very big language, not a small language, it encounters a lot of problems with machine translation. Okay, sorry, try and move more quickly. Okay, this is an example of one of those pros.coms. Do you feel threatened by machine translation? No, not really. No, definitely not. Together that accounts for about 3/4 of translators. And these are people who have experience with both CAT tools and machine translation. I don't think they're people who have their head in the sand. Why not? Why aren't they threatened? Because they just don't think it's good enough. It's always going to need human intervention. On the yes side, and this is the big point of this forum, what they feel threatened by is perceptions of what machine translation can do, of how good it is, wow, instant, and so it leads to unrealistic demands from clients, not people who have more experience with machine translation, but some people. So what kind of threats are translators worried about? Okay, I haven't heard anybody who's seriously worried about being ousted altogether out. Not even among promoters of machine translation. I think this shows a misunderstanding of how translation works, whether human or machine. Something like Google Translate relies on human translation as its resource. And it's the same with translation memories. We're talking about statistical matching. And then even if massively improved, would any company really release a translation that's untouched by human hands? Now, that's not the same as like your meteorological site where you have a very limited thing to translate, but particularly in the medical field, even companies that develop in-house translation memories and CAT tools, they employ people still to oversee that process, and that's an important role. Okay, less work. I'm kind of raising these to get rid of them. No. You would know that there's more need for translation than you can meet. I see CAT tools as helping us meet that need rather than reducing the pool of work. If there are savings, hopefully organisations will try and do more with the same rather than the same amount with less. that might not be realistic in cases of some of your organisations, but still. Okay, there's another way. Look, if you can translate something easily through machine translation... It does save time or it doesn't. It's going to rely on, you working with your translators and finding out what works and what doesn't. So this is the problem. It's not lower rates per se, it's lower rates for the same amount of work from the translator side. Other cost factors, your admin costs, your workflow, a lot of that stuff is not going to change even if you translate your method. And you also have upfront technology costs. I don't think this applies to the kind of material you're translating, but if you're translating personal documents, then you want to be careful about sending it to Google Translate, or some people are worried about that, because Google Translate owns everything you send to it, basically, and can technically access it. So with personal documents, it's not going to work. A little industrial relations issue. If you insist on your translator using certain tools or provide them with certain tools, then you might be crossing the contractor-employee line, and that is a big concern for government organisations these days. My take-home messages. Understand your tools and how they work. Understand the variables, text, language. And of course, the most important thing is to understand your translator and how he or she works. Build a relationship with them. Respect, understanding, communication. I'm much more open to negotiate with people I know respect me. That's it. Thank you.